Thank you, worship team, for leading us this morning. It's good to be together, right? Good to worship God, good to reflect on His sacrifice for us. How are you? Yeah? I see a few smiles. My name is Brian, if we haven't met before. I'm part of the team here, and I work with younger people, with young adults, the interesting group where some are in university, some are studying, some are working out what their life looks like. It's a great group of people to work with, and I still class myself as being in that group as well. So I'm still trying to work out what life looks like, as I'm sure we all are. But today, it's my pleasure to bring the word. We're journeying through the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' sermon, Matthew 5 and 6, as we step through the book by James Bryan Smith, A Good and Beautiful Life. So we're up to week 8, or chapter 8, in the book, and as part of our discipleship journey, James Bryan Smith asks us to learn to live without vainglory. Now, vainglory is not something that's in my vocabulary usually, so we're going to explore that together and what it means to be a disciple of Jesus and to live without vainglory. Our grounding for today is Matthew 6, so if you've got your Bibles there or you've got your phones, please get those ready. I will get to that in a little bit. But as I usually like to do when I speak, I like to get a little bit of participation from you all. So I'm going to ask you a question. It's not something you need to share with anyone else, but I'd like to ask you, have you ever done something purely so that it would be noticed by someone else? Purely so that they would recognize that you did that, or you said that, or you wore that, and they would give you a compliment. I was reflecting, and I was like, last time I did that, I was probably waiting for my wife to get home so I could be recognized for taking the rubbish to the bin. So it's part of my human nature. It's probably part of your human nature as well. Maybe you were working on a huge project at work. You're part of something, and you just it was a success, and so you casually slip that into conversation with someone else, to be associated with that success. Maybe you really wanted to impress someone, so you dressed a certain way and you spoke a certain way. These are all things that we do to get people to like us, to get people to think better of us. And that's one form of vainglory, a way that we take the glory for ourselves. Perhaps you've dreamt of greatness. I know when I was a teenager, I had great dreams of playing cricket for Australia. But maybe cricket's not your thing. Maybe it's making it to the NBA, leading your team to the NBA finals, and it's a tight game, and then in the last second you sink that three-pointer to win the game, and you get the glory. It was you who took your team there, and you who won the game. Maybe it's having your work recognized, a book published, a video that you make go viral. We used to be 15 seconds of fame, but I don't know how many seconds it is now, but we want our fame. We want to be known, we want to be recognized, we want to become a worldwide success. I wonder, can you relate to that? Can you relate to thinking, if I just had that thing, if I just knew those people, if I just got that promotion or achieved that thing in my life, then it would be better. Then I would be somebody. That's vainglory. That's us trying to build ourselves up, trying to take the glory. Now, having these dreams, having goals, being a success in life is not bad. God's given us talents to use. But what is bad is potentially our motivations. So that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to explore, and it might go below the surface, might be a little bit uncomfortable, but our motivations for why we do what we do. Motivations for why we do good. Motivations for why we try and achieve what we achieve. Because that's what Jesus speaks to in the Sermon on the Mount in this chapter 6. So I want to as we've sort of established, it's pretty normal. It's a common human experience to take glory. But that's not how we were designed. In the garden, in the beginning, when God created humans, we were created for His glory. There's a few parts that we were created to be in His presence, in His glorious presence, and then we were created to reflect His glory back to Him. There's a whole lot of theology wrapped up in that, which we won't get into, but just know that we were created for the purpose of glorifying God. And that's why there's this deep desire within us to get glory. Because when we sinned, when humanity fell away from God, when we broke that relationship, we distorted the glory. It was no longer the glory being given to God, the glory being reflected back to God, but we had to manufacture it for ourselves. And instead of directing it to God, we directed it to ourselves. This wasn't God's intention, but it's what we've made it. Classic example of this, many of you will know the story of the Tower of Babel. It's in Genesis 11. Just after the big flood and all Noah's descendants, they got together and they decided we're going to build a tower. We're going to build a tower up to heaven. We're going to make a name for ourselves. We're going to leave a legacy. It's vainglory. Let us make a name for ourselves. Let us manufacture our own glory. That's what vainglory is. Now, when I say glory, there's probably, we've got an idea of what that is, but we might all be thinking a few different things. So let's look at what glory is in Hebrew, because it's interesting in Hebrew. This word that we translate into glory has a few different definitions based on the context, based on who the subject of the sentence is as well. But it's all got to do with weightiness. It's all got to do with substance. Now, it can be literal. So in Exodus 17, where the Israelites are fighting the Amalekites, did I say that right? Yeah. Moses is standing up on the hill, and he's holding the staff above his head. And it says, his hands or his arms became kavod, became heavy, became weighty. And so it's the physical, literal sense. It can just be heavy. But usually when we talk about God, and we talk about God's kavod, God's weight, we're talking about His splendor, His significance. We're talking about His power, His majesty. We're talking about Him being worthy of honor and respect. So we're talking about the weightiness of His character. It's not all of His character, but it's not all of His glory that we're talking about, but you're talking about this intangible part. You with me? That's sort of what we're trying to do for ourselves, isn't it? We're trying to take on grandeur. God's got an immeasurable glory, immeasurable quality, immeasurable weight. Yet when we try and prop ourselves up, when we try and take the glory for ourselves, we're trying to improve our status. We're trying to take on grandeur. We're trying to make ourselves more worthy, or make ourselves seem more worthy to other people. Does anyone see a problem with that? Trying to make ourselves appear more worthy? You see, the problem is who's determining our worth there. We're letting other people determine what we think about ourselves. That's the false narrative. The false narrative is that my value is determined by your assessment, or your value is determined by someone else's assessment. It's not how it was intended. It's a false narrative. I stole a quote from another pastor, but it just fits so well. And so this is from Alan de Botton. The attention of others matter to us because we're afflicted by a congenital uncertainty as to our own value. We don't know who we are. As a result of this affliction, we tend to allow others' appraisals to play a determining role in how we see ourselves. Our sense of identity is held captive. We're not free. It's held captive by the judgments of those that we live among. Does that resonate with you? We let others tell us how to live, and we're held in bondage by what others think of us. See, taking the glory for ourselves, living with this vainglory, we need to be accepted. We need to be liked. We need to It needs to be validated. So we start to live our life like a performance. We start to think about our life in terms of what we can do, what we can achieve, how we can be better, how we can be noticed. And we carefully curate what others see. Because we don't always live up to the standard we set for ourselves. We don't always do what we'd love to do. And so we don't let people see the parts of us that don't bring us glory. But we make sure that they see the parts that we think do. Try and curate it. When we do something that we think is positive, we need to make sure they see it. You know, we need to humbly brag, just to make sure that they knew that we did that thing. And something else I've noticed in me, and maybe you've noticed in you too, but we can try to take glory by association. You know, we try and piggyback on someone else's glory. You know, we catch ourselves name dropping. You know, we catch ourselves, just casually mentioning something about someone else that makes us appear more valuable because we know them or because we're a part of it. And when you say it out loud, it seems funny, but it's what we do. It's what I do anyway. All you need to do is look around at your social media, at what's on TV, and you'll know what I'm talking about. People trying to take glory. People trying to build honor, build reputation, get their worth from other people. Does anyone remember Kodak moments? If you're my age or older, you might remember Kodak moments. What were they? Yeah, it was film. But Kodak moments were about capturing the moment so that you could remember it later and look back on it. Yeah. Then we moved to Instagram moments. We go to this side for Instagram moments. Instagram moments, what were they about? They're about showing other people the life you were living or the life you wanted to portray to them. And then there's TikTok moments, which are manufacturing things for others to see. These are all ways that we take glory, all ways that we live with vainglory. Now, this desire for fame, for recognition, it can also happen in church, right? Never this church, but it could happen. This is actually what Jesus is talking about in his Sermon on the Mount. He's talking to the religious leaders, to the Pharisees, and those who are telling people how to live, and yet their life is not matching up to it. So let's read this together. As we read, I want you to have a look at how the religious leaders are putting on a facade, how they're trying to be thought well of, how they're making their religious piety a way of gaining glory, a way of getting attention, a way of building their reputations. So Matthew chapter 6, and we don't have all the verses there, just a few to highlight. But chapter 6, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. If you do, you'll have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, in order to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. Giving's good. Generosity is great. We had a message from Rod about that last week. Yet the motivation is what God looks at. Don't announce it in order to be honored by others. It's okay if people find out, but that's not our motivation for giving, not our motivation for being generous. How about prayer? Very famous chapter, Matthew chapter 6. It's got the Lord's Prayer, but we're not actually going to speak on that today. When you pray, praying's good, but when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners in order to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. Fasting, down in verse 16. When you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others that they are fasting. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. Jesus is building a picture here of people who are using their status, their position, their deeds in order to take the glory for themselves. It's like, what's ironic is that they're meant to be the leaders, they're meant to be the people pointing us to God, and yet they're trying to take glory for themselves. And so he's saying, as a disciple, as one of his followers, we shouldn't be living for our glory, but the motivations of our heart should be doing good in order to please God, doing good in order that God gets all of the glory. The remedy for this vainglory, this false narrative of caring what other people think, the remedy for that is living for God. It's living for an audience of one. So we're not tossed around by the latest craze or fad, but we care what God thinks about us. Who matters more? Your colleague at work and their opinions? Your friend at uni and their opinions? An influencer over in the US, and what they think about life or what they think you should be doing with your life? Whose opinion matters more? Does not the God of the universe, the God who created you and everything else, doesn't his opinion matter more? I mean, if we're trying to take glory, shouldn't we try and associate ourselves with his glory? Because that's the most glory you can attach yourself to. St. Augustine said, there can only be two loves, two basic loves, and that should be up on the screens. The love of God unto the forgetfulness of self, or the love of self unto the forgetfulness and denial of God. When we take on the glory, we try and manufacture the glory for ourselves that was meant for God, we're denying God. We're saying we're the most important thing. And that goes against the purpose we're created for, and it goes against the most abundant life we can live. See, we're a slave to other people's opinion when we live with vainglory. It's restrictive. It's not actually a free and abundant life. Yet Jesus offers us a way to live a secure life, right? A way to live a life that is free. Because what the world says about us, what your colleagues say about you, what your friends say about you, that can change from week to week to week, based on the latest craze or the current weather or the current geopolitical climate. But what God says about you, that's true, and it's true forever. What does God say about you? He says, I made you. He says, I know you. He says, I love you. And he says, you're not alone. Now, if we can get those narratives, rather than think about what others think of us, we get those narratives, I made you, I know you, I love you, you are not alone. We get that into our head, let that sink through every fiber of our body. That's going to free us. That's an invitation into an amazing life, a joy-filled life. It doesn't change our circumstance necessarily, but it does allow us to live freely and lightly and experience joy in this life. So how do we get it? How do we shift from thinking about ourselves to giving God all the glory and taking his narrative of who we are on board? It requires humility. We've got to say, I'm not living for the attention, for the audience of the many, but I'm living for the audience of one. I value God more than I value other people's opinions. We also need humility because one of the opinions in the mix is my opinion. And so we have to surrender our own opinion to him. Stand on the truth of what he says about us, but actually acknowledge that we're broken, we're sinful, and we don't measure up to his glory, and accept his grace and accept his love. So our response is humility. A great example of humility is John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin. We can read in John 3, John is telling the people about Jesus. He's witnessing to who Jesus is. And so from 3:27, I don't think this will be on the screens. It says, this is John speaking, a person can receive only what is given to them from heaven. God has given us a name. He's given us worth. You yourselves can testify to what I said. John says, I'm not the Messiah, but I am sent ahead of him. The bride belongs to the bridegroom. The friend who attends the bridegroom waits and listens for him, and he's full of joy when he hears the bridegroom's voice. John says, that joy is mine, and it's now complete because I have seen Jesus. This is the takeaway in his next line, John 3:30. It's well known. He must become greater, and I must become less. We realize our position. We realize that we are created to reflect God's glory back to him. And we say, I don't want to take the glory for myself. I want to reflect it back to God. He must become greater, and I must become less. The soul training, or our spiritual practice for this week, if you're reading through the book, it's about secret service. It's about doing something intentionally that no one will notice. You know? Helping someone, just with no intention of ever getting any recognition for it at all. So I'd love for you to try that. If you do get found out, it's okay. But try again. Try to do it so that you don't get found out. And what I want you to notice is the motivation of your heart, or what happens within your heart. Because if you can do that and you experience joy because you did something and you got no recognition, but you know God got it, then you're good. But if it eats at you and you go, I just really wish someone would notice, I got to do it again a little bit more boldly, that way hopefully, or just drop a subtle hint in somewhere. If it's eating at you, then it's something you need to work on. Vainglory might be a part of your life, and it's, as a disciple of Jesus, as we grow to become more and more like him, vainglory should diminish. Vainglory should reduce. We should be sending all the glory back to God. So we're going to praise God. We're going to try and make him greater, try and focus our attention on him as we sing one final song. But just before we do that, I'd love to pray a blessing over you. The blessing out of Colossians 3. May the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body, we are called to peace and to be thankful. That the message of Christ dwell richly among us as we teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in our hearts. And whatever we do, whether in word or in deed, may we do it all in the name of our Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. To God be all the glory forever and ever.